And returning to our developing story with Russia firing on 3 Ukrainian ships off the Crimean Peninsula, Chief Foreign Correspondent Philip Williams joins us now. And Phil, what are the risks of this conflict escalating?
Well, they're very high if we get a reaction from the Ukrainians. If they decide to respond in a military way, then there's obviously the risk that that could escalate and get out of hand. And that's always the problem. It's not necessarily the isolated incident in itself, it's what it could spark. But let's talk to someone that's very much steeped in all of this. Jacky Westermann, the researcher with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, a European security and Russian expert. What are the risks with this particular incident?
So first of all, we agreed before that it was not very surprising this happened. Unfortunately, it was a matter of time. And we see kind of this as a very typical thing happening, both sides blaming each other to having provoked this incident. And obviously the big danger of this is that it escalates the war that has been ongoing for 5 years within Ukraine beyond Ukrainian borders out into the international waters. So yeah, we could see a spiral of escalation of this conflict.
It's very clear that the Russians actually stopped this convoy going through, that it was their decision, it's not going through. They claim they weren't warned about it, that this was a deliberate provocation. But given that they actually made that first move to stop it, what's in it for Moscow? Well,
first of all, the Russians obviously see it differently. They say, as you said, they didn't know about it. The Ukrainians claim they did inform the Russian side that this convoy would go from Odessa to Mariupol, and both sides are allowed to use the Strait of Kerch. There's a bilateral agreement that both sides are allowed to use it. But obviously, Russia has the advantage since they built the bridge from Russian mainland to annex Crimea, that they can control who goes in.
They are literally calling the shots there.
And so it was easy for them to get the tanker in front of it, the cargo ship, and stop any commercial flow in and out of the Azov Sea.
OK, so what are the options for the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko?
So they had an emergency meeting of the War Cabinet on Sunday, where Petro Poroshenko, Ukrainian President, suggested that he might ask Parliament to implement martial law.
Well, that's a drastic measure in itself.
That is a very drastic measure. It hasn't happened in the past years. So the illegal annexation of Crimea, the ongoing conflict in Donbass, nothing has provoked or moved the president or parliament yet to call for martial law.
So why would you do it now?
So some people say that it's a very strategic move. There are presidential elections to be held in Ukraine in 4 months. If he manages to convince parliament to implement martial law, that could actually lead to the elections being postponed. And seeing he is at the moment top to lose those elections to Julia Tymoshenko, it would be quite handy for him to have martial law and no elections anytime soon. And also, if you actually look in 2015, the Ukrainian Parliament, Rada, they passed a law describing what different measures are of martial law, and it includes all sort of things. So they could actually control telecommunication, mass media, they could force people to follow orders from the military, take in people, relocate people, deport foreigners.
So it's a very serious threat.
It is, it is.
What of the peace talks, where do we go from here? I mean, we're supposed to be, with the Minsk agreement, there's supposed to be a de-escalation. It seems to be anything but.
Yeah, so the Minsk II agreement, brokered between France, Germany, Russia and Ukraine, has, I don't want to use the word failed, but it has definitely halted, and half of the agreed terms have not been implemented yet, or only partially been implemented. And obviously an incident like the one on the weekend shows that there is no moving forward anytime soon. There's no political will on both sides, to be quite honest, but obviously having the Russians in as a agreeing party and dictating the terms, it is quite difficult to find an eternal peace coming out of that. But at the moment, it is the best thing we have, and all sides have agreed that they are still committed to the Minsk II agreement.
Viktor Poroshenko obviously will be under pressure to respond, seen as the victim here. He's painted himself, his country, as the victim here. What are his military options, given that he hasn't really got a navy or an air force that could challenge the Russians? What can he do?
So Petro Poroshenko has already, refused to say he mobilized the reserves. He told the reserves to be ready and alert. He very quickly sent the message that this is, even if he mobilized, it was only for defensive purposes. He does not want to declare war. He does not want to use offensive measures. It is only simply to defend Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty.
But if there's a flare-up in the east of the country where the rebels control the Donetsk and Luhansk region, if there is an escalation there, isn't the risk that the Russians will come back even harder? They could even lose a vital port like Mariupol.
Exactly, and I think this is also why we can see all sides, the international community, NATO, the EU, all speaking out and calling for both sides to de-escalate and trying to find a solution to this issue, which is also not only the Ukrainian Parliament is meeting on Monday, Ukrainian time, but also the United Nations Security Council. Apparently both Russia and Ukraine asked for an emergency meeting. So we can see a lot of international attempts to not have that escalate any further. But
accidents can happen.
Accidents can happen, and accidents, maybe it was, I think we can agree it was not an accident that happened on Sunday. It looked very like a strategic move.
By whom? Instigated by whom?
Well, by the looks of it, it was Russia. But, you know, both sides blame each other, as always, in situations like that. So we will see how the Russians said they will apparently publish proof that the Ukrainians provoked. But with what we have now, what we know now, it very much looks like it was a deliberate move from the Russians. But I'm happy to take that back if something else comes out, proves it was the other way around. But yeah, I agree. Accidents can happen, and there's always that risk that something provokes the other side in such a regard that they take a measure that might retaliate in such a drastic way that it could provoke other partners of Ukraine to feel obliged to do something as well. But you know, everyone will be very careful to start a Third World War over this.
Well, let's hope that that isn't the case and that we do get through this period relatively unscathed. Jacqueline Westermann, thanks very much for your time.
Anytime, thank you.